The last thing you want to hear when you need your auto insurance most is a robot with countless irrelevant menu options. Which is why with USAA Auto Insurance, you'll get great service that is easy and reliable, all at the touch of a button. Get a quote today. Restrictions apply.
USAA.
Hilton brings you new ways to stay. With experiences that let you capture the glory days. Introducing the Graduate Hotels. Each inspired by local college towns, these stays are always original and never boring. Get in touch with traditions all across the country and enjoy a stay that's a class above the rest. Book at Graduate Hotels with Hilton Honors Points at Hilton.com. It's a win-win. Hilton, for the stay.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. When your computer breaks, you don't wait for it to magically start working again. You fix the problem. So why wait to hire the people your company desperately needs? Use Indeed's sponsored jobs to hire top talent fast. And even better, you only pay for results. There's no need to wait. Speed up your hiring with a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
All right, stop the presses. Coach Bill and I are going. That's old. Gosh, I sound old, don't I? I sound old when I say stop the presses.
Paper. Yeah.
Paper. Nobody reads the paper anymore. Stop the internet.
Posting.
Coach and I have a couple big announcements. I haven't told my wife about these yet, but go ahead. So go ahead and share what our big announcements are.
We probably should get permission from our wives before.
Whatever. We'll figure it out.
I'll talk to your wife. You talk to mine.
Okay, that's done.
All right. Done. So we're going to come see you. What do we mean by that? So Coach and I are going to give away our time to your nonprofit organization and do a free coaches clinic. We're going to pick one group to do that with this year. So what do you have to do to get on that list? And we're going to do a 3-hour clinic at your location. We'll mutually agreed upon date and time and
topic.
And topics.
We can talk about the funnel now. We can talk about blitz. We can talk about man-to-man. We can talk, you name it. Coach and I are not going to miss
practice planning or whatever it is you want to talk about. So we'll come and educate your coaches. So go sign up. coachingyouthhoops.com/clinic to get on that list. One lucky winning group will get that. But we have prizes for second and third place. So second place, you are going to receive a IC3 shooting machine. So second place, IC3 shooting machine. Third place, you are going to get
you personally,
whoever signed up, we're going to give you a season's worth of free practice planning. So you'll have complete access to our library of drills designed practice plans for specific to every age group. So again, go to coachingyouthhoops.com/clinic.
And everybody gets something, right?
That's right. Everybody gets something. You're going to get our online preseason coaches clinic. So get you up and running with your preseason, how to run tryouts, how to evaluate players, how to get set up and structure your season to have a successful successful season. So
and give the URL again.
Yeah, it's coachingyouthhoops.com/clinic. So it's our URL, coachingyouthhoops.com/clinic.
All right, and what was this? And what's the second thing, Coach? There's one more, if you can believe it. One more thing, if you can believe it.
Yeah, so we're pretty excited about this. We've been listening to your feedback on our practice plans, what you're looking for, how you want them structured, what you guys need, and we've listened. We've come out with a new platform. It's going to be launching in the fall, right in time for basketball season in the States. And you're going to be able to change your practice plans, add drills. They're going to become pre-populated with all the practice plans, so you could just use it and go. Or if you want to tweak things based on the needs of your team, you can do that there as well. So coaches, get on that waiting list. We'll have a special discount for you if you're on the waiting list, only waiting list members. Okay, so you go to coachingyouthhoops.com/wait list, WAITLIST.
All right.
Coachingyouthhoops.com/wait list.
All right, awesome. And now we're gonna head off to the music, the intro, the podcast. All right, here we go.
Let's do it.
From the Fifth Quarter Studio in Madison, Wisconsin, you're listening to the Coaching Youth Hoops Podcast.
They're playing basketball.
Here's our hosts, Steve Collins, and Bill Flitter.
Hello, coaches. Welcome to another episode of Coaching Youth Hoops. Today we have an amazing guest on our podcast, Alex Sarama. And Alex, welcome to the podcast.
Bill, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be on the podcast. So really excited for the discussion we're going to have today. So thanks for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. And if Alex's face doesn't look familiar, or if his voice doesn't sound familiar, we'll do a quick intro. Any YouTube search on his name will pull up quite a few videos. Coach, you've been pretty active on YouTube and teaching the game of basketball, and we do all appreciate that. But more specifically, you've been focused on kind of a constraints-led approach and ecological dynamics. Now, that is a mouthful that I can't wait to dive into and have you explain what that means. But currently, you're working with the Portland Trailblazers. Despite his English accent, he's coaching over here in the United States, or he had during the season. You're director of methodology for the London Lions. Again, another thing I want to dive into. Never heard of a director of methodology. You consult for NBA, NCAA, pro teams, sporting federations. Delivered clinics and camps for over 40 countries. Worked in Germany, Poland, Saudi Arabia, is that right? Sweden.
Correct. Yeah.
Norway. What else? Oh, this is another one. You've written the new global curriculum for the NBA. Oh my
Correct.
goodness. I've definitely gotten into that. But you've been a busy coach. And I think today, now as we're recording this, your book just launched today.
That's
so that's
correct,
awesome.
Bill.
So
Yep.
I will put a link in the show notes to your book.
Much
you can find that
appreciated.
you can find that on Amazon. So let's dive into that. Was a lot. And you've really taken a more of a studied approach to basketball, broke it all down, worked through different ways for us coaches to think about how we train players. And I'm very curious, where did this interest come from? I don't even know where to start. I mean, this is like an octopus. We can go in so many directions, which I'm excited about. But first off, you've been busy. Where did this all start?
Absolutely, Bill. So firstly, thanks for the introduction. It's going to be
Did
fun.
I miss anything? I mean, man,
no, it's
Coach, that's
definitely all
pretty
bases
resume.
covered.
Yeah.
All bases covered. So I grew up in the UK, and obviously I'm very happy to say not a hotbed of hoops, and it's grown a lot since I was kind of a youngster growing up here. But I knew I wanted to be a coach from a very young age, and I realized I'd never be good enough as a player. And I just felt that if I wanted to have a career in basketball, I had zero connections in the game. I was like the first person in my family to ever play basketball. I knew I had to have something really quite different that differentiated me if I wanted to have a career in the sport. So I'd say like very early on, I was really drawn to the idea of continuous improvement, studying, and I just tried to do everything I could, watching clinics online, reading books to become a better coach when I started as an 18-year-old. And so I think what that did is it set the tone for me to naturally move towards evidence-based ideas. And all I mean by that, Bill, is that I think now we're so fortunate because we have research available to us in the field of motor learning. That's what it's called in North America, skill acquisition outside the US. But a lot of work has been done in this field over the last few years, over the last decade. And essentially, researchers and professors have done this hard work for us in, universities around the world by looking at what drives skillful behavior in sport and just how athletes can learn more effectively. And so what happened was I came across this research about 5 years ago, and I just realized that no one was applying this in basketball. And I mean, very few coaches even in sports. And, I'd say some sports like soccer naturally were more coaches have been using small-sided games in sports like soccer for decades, but it hasn't been as part of the framework, the constraints-led approach, which we're going to get onto. But I found in basketball, even things like small-sided games are very foreign to coaches, where a lot of the learning environments, even today, are mostly drill-based, kind of repeating techniques, etc. And so really, I've just made it my life goal to try and transform the basketball world by breaking down the complexity of some of these ideas and really just putting it into translatable terms, which coaches of all level can understand, whether they're a coach working with beginners or in the NBA, looking at what the science tells us and then how we can coach in a way which aligns with that science so our players can learn more effectively. And that's essentially everything I'm doing with Transforming Basketball, the name of my company and also the name of the book, and just sharing these practical solutions for coaches.
Yeah, and I forgot. Yeah, the name of the book is Transforming Basketball, so you can look that up on Amazon as well. But talk about this idea of constraints-led approach and ecological dynamics. I never heard of ecological dynamics until I started reading your stuff. So,
absolutely. So, it is quite a shocking word when you're first exposed to it. At least that's what I felt. I remember how it felt, 5 years ago during the reading. I was like, what on earth is that? I think the best way to understand it for coaches is it's a framework, an evidence-based framework that we can use to actually understand human movement. Because this is what's really interesting, Bill. I think it kind of, when I do a lot of coach education, I often start by asking coaches, well, how does human movement actually occur? How do we function? How do we move as human beings? And it seems a very abstract question to start with. But the really, and it's no one's fault because as coaches, we're well-intentioned. I was teaching fundamentals and doing all this stuff for years, before I changed. And I think a lot of coaches would give replies like muscle memory, whereas the reality is there's actually no such thing as muscle memory. And it's very difficult, Bill, because it goes against years of what we've done individually and also what we see famous coaches doing. And that can be quite a challenge to grasp when it's just such an alternative approach. So really with ecological dynamics, it's a way of understanding how human movement, it's all based on the interaction with the environment. So what that means is there is always information which shapes movement, aka skills in basketball. So in other words, if we know that players move according to what they're seeing, what information they're picking up in their environment, as coaches, it means even a very simple task like dribbling, well, players dribble and the way they dribble is based on what they see. So how could we maybe create a situation like a tag game for beginners or maybe a really simple one-on-one where they've got to keep the dribble alive in an area and there's just one defender who uses one hand to try and steal the ball. So it's really trying to make sure there's some type of decision in everything the players do. And the learning, aka a lot of coaches often would say, what about the technical skill, the actual movement itself? Well, the idea is that that's shaped and that will improve within the context of the players playing the game. So that's really where we get to the constraints-led approach, which was, the first part of that question. So the idea is simply that ecological dynamics gives us a really good understanding of human movement. So now how we coach, it changes how we coach. And it's a complex topic, Bill. I mean, it took me 3 chapters to explain ecological dynamics in the book with loads of basketball examples. But the constraints-led approach is a more specific coaching tool that we can use, which is based completely on an ecological framework. And the idea is we're just using constraints very specifically. And this is the cool thing. Coaches have been using constraints for years, Bill. The difference is it hasn't kind of been intentional and it hasn't been the whole time during a practice. So All I'm trying to do is make coaches more aware of how they can use these constraints, and constraints are not just limiting factors. So yes, you might say to a player, you can only play in this space, or you can only score this way in this small-sided game. But it's a lot deeper than that. And really the idea is take a small-sided game. So that could be a one-on-one, a two-on-one, a two-on-two, any type of small-sided game. And you're basically just changing the game through different variations. So that could be the equipment you use, the space they have available, the scoring system, how they start, like how they begin within the activity. So the idea is we could have some small-sided games, but we slightly change it every time. So instead of doing the same game every time, which is what we've seen in the basketball world for years when players do play live, well, instead, let's just change it with one change, one small tweak changes everything. And that could be as simple as, okay, we're going to do the same activity with a 6-second shot clock. Everything changes. And that's this whole idea with the constraint set approach, just looking at all the different constraints available to us and why we might use them in a practical setting.
Yeah, it totally makes sense. I mean, one of the things that, we do in our practice plans, at Coaching Youth Hoops too, we put, constraints in there. And we give coaches ideas on, well, what is a constraint for this particular drill? Now, I would imagine the pushback you get, and especially let's take, for our audience, let's take a young third grade player just starting out, okay? Maybe can dribble a little bit, shot, shooting with two hands. And now you're telling a coach that, think about this, right, Alex? Again, I know you've been through this argument, which is, well, I got to show them how to shoot properly.
Yeah.
Right? I got to show them how to dribble properly before they can, before we can, play in a game, or just I have to show them the mechanics of X move.
Yeah.
Right.
We've all been there. Yeah.
Yeah. So how do you? What is your answer to that?
Absolutely. So honestly, Bill, that was the hardest thing with this approach, and that was the biggest thing I wrestled with early on. I didn't know how to do it well. So I've really figured out lots of creative solutions for this. And I think firstly, this is where kind of ecological dynamics helps, because what it informs us is that players are all going to move in different ways because every player's body is so different. So especially in something like shooting, players are going to shoot so differently. And we see that in the NBA and WNBA, with even like some of the best shooters have very unorthodox movements and shooting solutions. So I think number one, appreciating that there's no one size fits all. And practically, though, we've got to make sure that the challenge is just right, because for the learning to be optimal, it can't be too difficult and it can't be too easy, the activity. So if you're just going to learn to shoot playing one-on-one with a heavily contested one-on-one, in all honesty, it's not going to be that useful. So kind of what this most important concept for youth coaches listening to this is using constraints to make the tasks the right level of challenge. And what this actually starts with, and this is the heart, to be honest, this is my philosophy of why Europe is producing so many players right now. It's something called equipment scaling, and that's a form of constraint itself. So what happens in the youth ages in Europe, under 12s, kids will play on 8-foot rims with size 5 basketballs. So you can imagine that is the best form of constraint in itself, because naturally the players start shooting and moving and they can do far more skillful things just because of that. So honestly, I've thought about this a lot. If I was coaching the US, I would try and convince parents or a club just to try and invest on these 8-rim hoops and smaller balls. And I think that would make the world of difference. So then the idea is, if we can do that, then how can we use constraints in the activities? So for instance, if I see a kid shooting with 2 hands, I might just put a constraint on them and say, you have to shoot with 1 hand. The key difference is I'm not saying, all right, put your elbow here, put your hand in this position.
Right.
I'm giving them freedom to explore different, solutions, but still within the confines of a 1-hand shot, because as coaches, we know that shooting with 2 hands is not going to be conducive. So we could just constrain it. If we see them shoot with 2 hands, we just say, turnover, do it again. And then the key thing is to make sure the advantage is big enough. So instead of having a defender really close, it could just be as simple as there's a defender who starts with the ball, and they're maybe kind of 6 to 10 feet away. They pass the ball from different places and they close out. So that's going to make sure the advantage is big enough. Versus if that defender's kind of right in front, there's no way that a beginner is going to be able to shoot the ball quickly and have success. So it's all about, all right, how can we change the constraints to make sure the level of challenge is just right? And I think appreciating that there's no kind of universal fundamental that's applicable to everyone. So if we can create all these environments, like a lot of what I do, Bill, is play one-on-one with beginners where the defense maybe have one hand to use, or they're holding a basketball instead of their hands. So there's still important information in the practice, but it's not too hard, and that's the most important thing with youth players.
Yeah, that's interesting. So in that case, then, for example, let's go through a couple of examples. So one of the things I often say is, if you walk into a practice of mine, the biggest compliment you could give me is, that's an ugly practice.
Fantastic.
And for coaches who don't understand what that concept is, I try to, I mean, I'm getting a lot better now that I've been coaching for 20 years, is saying fewer things, stopping. But there's certain things that, we all have our pet peeves, and it's like that is non-negotiable, right?
Yep.
And so, I'll stop and explain. But, my practice is ugly in that I just totally believe in letting players figure it out, because that's game. I can teach the best offense in the world, which is the blitz attack offense, by the way, coaches out there. But even with that, I know it breaks down, and the defense doesn't cooperate with how we practiced. And so I want them to figure it out. Now, what I do say a lot is I give them concepts, and I have a whole series of ABCs, and my students can recite them. So it's always be creating space is one thing on the offense. I don't care what you do, just create space between. So you're, for example, I have a third grade team, not a lot of outside shooters. So we need layups, right?
Yeah, that's
so it. I said, if you get in the path of your teammate, you're going to take away her layup. All right. So we talk about, and I'll just yell out when they're scrimmaging, space, right? And I constantly just yelling, and I see them move, right? I see them move. Or or if I dribble at you, you have to do something. You can't just stay there. Right? You're either going to back cut, come for a ball handoff, what level ever, we're teaching, right? So is that the general concept of how you're thinking and what you believe in?
100%. And I actually call that principles of play, Bill. And I think that's the way to go at youth offense. And even at NBA offense, it's the same thing. And I call what you just explained, I try and have some catchy terms for everything. So I've got some principles. So like one is we don't want to ever allow one defender to guard two of us on offense. So just move wherever you can, where we're not kind of holding hands and allowing one defender to guard two. And then I have this concept, it's actually a constraint called floor is lava, where if the players ever catch the ball inside the mid-range, unless they're cutting, it's a turnover. And what that does in every small-sided game we officiate it is the spacing becomes amazing. So you end up, you could do it different formats, whether it's 3 out, 4 out, 5 out, whatever. But especially at the youth level, I love just having a weak side dunker, because as you said, you have to get shot selection is the most important principle of play there, layups.
Yeah.
So kind of you're creating double gaps and allowing, I call it a gold medal shot. So we want gold medals over silver and bronze medals, ideally. And how they do that is spacing. So floor is lava in every small-sided game. If a player shrinks the space and they catch in the mid-range, we just yell turnover. And without having to say, you stand here, boom, boom, it's amazing what kids start doing after a week. And that's exactly it. I just think principles of play, conceptual offense, you can do it with third graders. You can have the most simple principles, and it's amazing to see what they do.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And one of the things that I did struggle with, and I started teaching 4 out, 1 in, 5 out, read and react. They're patterned offenses.
Yeah.
But what I have found is sometimes a pattern is good if it's the right pattern.
Sure.
And what I mean by that is, and I'll just use it again, I created the blitz attack offense because I wanted all 5 players doing something. And what I
Sure.
found with a 5-out motion was, as an example, was ball side had all the movement going on and weak side became spectators.
Sure.
At the youth level again. We're talking the
Yep.
youth level, right? And they just didn't know what to do. Right? They didn't know, oh, do I cut? Do I, they're always trying to go after the ball. So then, then they're
Sure.
cutting over to the weak side's cutting over to the strong side. And that's where the concept of space came in. Do I set a down screen? Do I exchange on the weak side? Do I just stand here? Like there was too many options and too many things for them. So then what I did is I said, well, we need to create triple gaps because never had outside shooters. Right.
Yeah.
We practice it. They're not quite developed yet. So we need to create double gaps to get layups. So now I have both sides doing something.
Love it.
And so, but then now it seems to be counterintuitive to what you're saying. Is that, or am I getting way too in the weeds?
I think you can have patterns. I think, at the end of the day, a set play is a pattern. I think the key thing, it's got to be done to a way where maybe there's a really obvious opportunity in the possession. And what we don't want is for a player to miss that. Like, for instance, a wide open cutter or like a chance to drive because the defender's out of position and you can easily get into the paint and create an advantage.
Yeah.
The key thing is I think it's so important where they're not running the pattern and missing out on those things. And that's where it's just getting the balance, right? And I think too, it's hard. It's funny, Bill, because it all comes down to the equipment too. And I think the reason why you're having to do those things is because the baskets and the size of the ball at that age, it's no wonder they're not able to shoot from outside.
Right.
Whereas in Europe,
right.
if say I was, let's just say theoretically, I was coaching a 3rd grade team in Europe, we literally probably could just space and have like simple principles without kind of scripted patterns because they'd be successful and the defenders would have to defend them realistically versus what I see a lot in the US is the defenders completely pack the paint in almost like zones because of the shooting. And that's the hardest thing. So it's always a balance, I think. And I think it's kind of the same when kids get older, I think just, when they get to like set plays and all that, I think it's so important to have them flexible enough where players still look to run a set, but they know when to break it off because there's a chance to create the advantage.
Yeah, no, okay. Well, that relieves my anxiety a little bit on that concept. So the other thing that I created for this particular reason, and I understand that somewhat having spoken with a lot of coaches, outside of the United States and, what we're doing well and what they're doing well and kind of melding the two thinking. I started a 3-on-3 league.
Love that.
And there are no coaches. What we do is we give I have high school, it's a girls league. So I have high school girls players who are the coaches / refs. So they're just the arbiter of the rules, making sure, there's safety and all of that.
Love that.
They will give instruction like, hey, go set a screen or hey, create space. They're talking and reffing at the same time. The idea was, as you know, and I don't know how this is in the UK and overseas, is kids just don't go out and play basketball anymore. And it's so structured and there's coaches yelling at them and then there's parents yelling at them. And one of the things, that I do in this league is I send out, you can cheer, you can't give instruction, right?
Fantastic.
There's reffing, but yet not really. It's just more for safety, right? And we'll call hard fouls and things, but we let them play. Right. Even sometimes they'll take a step or two at the younger levels. Right. And as it goes up, we'll tighten that portion up, but we just let them play. And I had a parent comment. She didn't like this very much. And she goes, this looks messy. And what do you think I said? I said, thank you. That's exactly the goal.
How they learn.
And she looked at me like, what? I said, that's how they learn. I said, that's why we do this, because we want them to learn the game on their own.
Exactly.
So I guess what I'm saying to you is, this approach and, practicing ugly or you called it principles of play is how we learn. I mean, that is mentally that's built into us as human beings. Yeah. And I'm assuming that's where some of these concepts have come from. And
yeah, absolutely. It's just, play is something just inherent to human beings. And unfortunately now, as you said, Bill, so many children nowadays aren't experiencing play because everything it's like an adult orientated environment that is being imposed on children. And everything is structured like AAU, work with a trainer. Right. And instead, years ago, there was far more free play. Children would just play in the streets, play with friends.
That's right. Yeah.
And unfortunately now AAU and skills trainers have replaced that. That's why I think it's so important to have an understanding of this if you're working in youth sports and consider how you can kind of take proactive steps in countering this. And that's why the best example you said is create a 3-on-3 league. I think that's the best thing, where maybe one practice becomes entirely 3-on-3. And this is why I love the CLA. You could even have different constraints for different rounds of games. So you could have, one game could be scores off cuts a double. One could be scores off layups a double. One could be you play with floor as lava in the actual 3-on-3. So there's so much cool stuff you can do. And I think that's exactly the way to go. And I'd even say if I had an under 12s team, anything under 12, I wouldn't even, like what we're doing at London Lions, we're not even putting them in 5-on-5 leagues. And obviously the parents are far easier to work with than I think, unfortunately, what you see in the States. And it's not the parents' fault, but it's the society's fault because they think they know what should be done. But we don't have the kids play 5-on-5. We just have them doing 3-on-3 leagues with different constraints, more touches, more opportunities to get better, more decisions. And then when they get to under 12, that's the first time they play 5-on-5 with 3-on-3 still. So I think it's just the best way to go.
Yeah, we do there's a rec league that I'm on the board of, and we do a mix. We start them off on 3-on-3, and then they go 5-on-5 in the second half of the season.
That's great. I think that's an awesome balance.
Yeah. And we tried to do all 3-on-3 especially because we have two rec leagues. One is a little bit more advanced and the other one is, really beginners. And we wanted the real beginner league just to go all 3-on-3, but then we got a lot of pushback. It's not real basketball. Well,
yeah.
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
Here in America, work is in trouble. We've offshored our manufacturing, sent away good jobs, and lost so much ability to make things. American Giant is a company that's pushing back against this tide. They make high-quality clothing, sweatshirts, jeans, dresses, jackets, and so much more right here in the USA. Visit American-Giant.com and get 20% off your first order when you use code STAPLE20 at checkout. That's 20% off your first order at American-Giant.com, promo code STAPLE20.